Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the We're Young But Just Us podcast here on the Sports Opinions Podcast Network's a podcast. Tonight, we're going to have a special guest in the form of Marz, he is the editor-in-chief of Ominous Press. He's a famous comic writer for both DC and Marvel. For Marvel, he's famous for his Silver Surfer run back in the late 80s and early 90s, and at DC for his co-creator Kyle Rayner, the fourth Green Lantern, with Darryl Banks, the artist of that book. He's the popular Green Lantern of those that grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. And, of course, as I said, he's the editor-in-chief of Ominous Press. And so we talk about that and the business of indie comics and some of the works that he's done and just the process of running an independent comic book publishing company. Then we dive into and then talk about Green Lantern and just a little bit of origins behind his run back in 1994 in an awesome time for New York City with the Knicks and the Rangers succeeding. And he got its own Green Lantern in the form of Kyle Rayner. We talk about how some of the aspects of Kyle Rayner came about. And then we move on to the sports world. We talk about his New York Giants and his favorite Eli memories and if he should belong in the Hall of Fame. And, of course, the future of the organization with Joe Judge as the new head coach. And we close it out with some talk about the New York Mets, the decision to fire Carlos Beltran in the Astros fiasco, and it's just what we think of the potential NL East race coming into 2020 and where the Mets fit into that. So, again, enjoy the episode.
He is. Swing drive, right center field. The Braves have won it. Elliott starts right, cuts it upfield, touchdown Dallas. They score! And Green, it's over! Forward for the win. Bam! Got it! And the Scarlet Knights win it! There is pandemonium in Piscataway!
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 4 of the We're Young But Just Us podcast. We're Young But Just Us podcast on the Sports Opinions Podcast Network's the podcast, where we talk about both a mix of comic book culture and the world of sports today and a little bit else, whatever goes on or whatever pops up. Today, I'm very excited to have a really special guest in the form of Marz. He is currently the editor-in-chief of Ominous Press. And he's well known for his work at DC and Marvel. At Marvel on Silver Surfer, and of course at DC for co-creating Kyle Rayner, the fourth Green Lantern, with Darryl Banks, who also has worked with him on Ominous Press for, I believe, Harkin's Raiders, and I saw him promoting that. So welcome aboard, Ron.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. It's not terribly usual that the Venn diagrams of comics and sports cross over, so this is kind of cool.
Oh yeah, I was thinking, I was like, you know what, I wasn't old. My friend wanted me to do the podcast to help him get started with a kind of a network thing. I didn't really have any total interest in doing a lot of sports because there's a decent amount of that, and I was like, wait a minute, I really like comics. What if we just intersected them? And I was like, you know what, I love talking about both, and I just decided to do it. And I'm glad to have you on to help me out. So let's get started in the right here and the right now. Ominous Press. So you are the editor-in-chief. Tell us about the publishing company.
Yeah, I'm the editor-in-chief, lead writer, and jack of all trades, master of none. And it's really a publishing company that was put together with my friends Bart Sears and Andy Smith, both of whom are artists and have written stuff as well. And our friend Sean Husvar, who's the publisher. And it really just grew out of a desire to, hey, let's make some comics. And we ended up growing into more of a publishing concern than probably any of us ever planned on. But, you get into the deep end of the pool and you see if you can tread water. So we've done, a number of graphic novels, single issue comics that we published through IDW. Art books. We just reprinted the complete Jim Starlin Dreadstar in 3 omnibus volumes. So we've done a bunch of different things, including stuff that I've written, that Bart's drawn, that Andy's drawn, and brought in friends like Tom Ranney and Darryl Banks, Matthew Dow Smith to draw some of the projects too. So it's it's I guess the definition of independent publishing. We're just pulled together a band of friends, and we're doing the kind of books we want to do. Most of them we take out through Kickstarters, and then fulfill them, and then maybe get them into other venues. But it's a lot of work, but it's very satisfying to be able to do exactly the kind of stories that you want to do.
Are you based out of the New York area? Is this based out of New York?
The main office is in Buffalo,
Right.
but most of us aren't in the main office. I'm in upstate, sort of in the Albany area. Bart's in Florida, Andy's in North Carolina. So it's the telecommuting gig that everybody has. Everybody's kind of scattered, and we're working with artists and writers literally all over the world. But Skype and email and WhatsApp and whatever other technological advance you want to name allows us to all be pulling in the same direction.
What were the biggest challenges? I'm assuming, since you said you did it with your friends, that you were there obviously at the beginning and starting this up. What were the biggest challenges for getting it off of the ground for you guys?
Well, I think as freelancers, we were all used to having a support system for doing the kind of stuff that we were doing. There's an editor in place. There's a publishing structure in place. There's PR. There's financing. Once you go out and do it on your own, you have to fulfill all those roles yourself, which isn't necessarily a complaint, but it just means that I come from a world where I've been writing comics for 30 years. That's been the main job I've had, my entire adult life. And now I have to wear a bunch of different hats. I have to wear the editor-in-chief hat, and I have to wear the hat of the guy that helps get the files ready and deals with our production designer and deals with getting files to the publisher and coordinates how we're going to fulfill the projects on Kickstarter. So, when I said, jack of all trades, master of none, that's kind of exactly what it's like. There's no net. You have to do all of that yourself. There's nobody to take care of all those other jobs. So a lot of times those other jobs end up eating up all of the time that you have. And then, I look up at the end of the day, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and it's like, oh wait, I actually haven't written anything today. I've still got 5 pages of script that have to get done today.
Yeah, going off on your own. I mean, a lot of people are catching on. If you're not obviously too much following comics, I mean, you have the general non-casual audience. They know about the Marvel, DC, and maybe Image. But yeah, once you dive in, you all have these your ominous. You have your Dark Horses, your Boom Studios. You have all this, and it's funny because you gotta. I think you were talking about something today, if I remember correctly. Like, there are a certain – you were wondering the amount of pages that come out in a week. I think you were tweeting about this earlier. And so, yeah, you have to compete with a lot of different people as well. So how do you find that to be that process about promoting yourself?
Well, it's a matter of trying to find a way to make sure your voice rises above the din of everybody else promoting all their stuff too. I think generally the comics market is awesome. We're doing more good books now than we ever have in the history of the medium, and we're doing books that are serving a much more diverse, a much wider audience. A graphic novel just won the Newbery Award for Best Children's Book. It's we're really entering a phase where sequential storytelling and graphic novels are really taking their place next to every other form of literature out there. It's just a vehicle for telling stories, and more people are recognizing that. So that means that there's more and more material out there, all of which is good, but you have to find a way to make your material stand out beyond anybody else's. And I think one of the obvious ways is social media. We're all so connected now, and you can reach out on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and tell people what you're doing. And if you get enough of them interested in what you're doing, you can make those projects real. It doesn't take a huge audience. It takes a dedicated audience. So I think we as a society are becoming more and more segmented in terms of the kind of entertainment we consume. So you need in some ways you don't need a huge piece of that audience. You just need that audience that you can attract to be really dedicated.
Yeah, and it's great because I think I've been seeing a lot of it. I wish, sadly, I'm only a college student. I wish I could support everybody, but I've seen all the Kickstarters and all the great packages that are being done to help get fans engaged. A lot of them I've seen, I think, where people get their names in the books and little Q&As a lot of times. And yeah, it's taken a different, it's definitely different. I can't say I'm not old enough to know the difference between how indie books were promoted back in the day. My norm is seeing the Kickstarters and the very interactive process that the fans have with, funding and enjoying independent comics. And it's definitely different. I know a couple other mediums do it, but yeah, it's just so prominent in comics.
Certainly when I broke into the business, the only way to do comics was to do comics for Marvel or DC or one of the other independent publishers that was out there, which kind of Dark Horse, and in a few years after I broke in, Image. There were gatekeepers essentially, and whether they were constructed as gatekeepers or not. There was really no other way to do your own comic and get it into the distribution system. It wasn't as anywhere near as you could go print your comic at the local stationery store or whatever and sell it out of the back of your car. But in terms of having like what we would perceive to be a professional comic, there was really no other way to do it except to work for one of the publishers. Now, with everything that has advented in the last 30 years between the digital technology and social media, creators can have a direct one-to-one relationship with people in the audience. You can make the product that you want and you can sell it directly to the audience. You can cut out the entirety of that whole publishing structure that's obviously existed for decades. If you want to do that, if you want to go it alone, kickstart your thing or make the thing yourself and simply sell it to people, it's very possible to do that. You can, it's very satisfying for me to do a project. We kickstart it at Ominous. Everybody comes together and makes the thing, and then a few months later, a box shows up via UPS on my front step, and I open it up, and there's this big, beautiful hardcover of what we produced. What we produced is exactly what we wanted it to be. So it's a very satisfying process to be able to do it yourself. That doesn't mean it's not satisfying to work for Marvel or DC or IDW or Image, and a lot of creators do both. That's the beauty of what we do is we can do comics for a big corporate parent. We can do comics for an indie publisher. We can do comics ourselves, and a lot of us choose to do all of those because they're all satisfying in a different way.
Yeah, you get to be your own Dan DiDio, if I'm correct on the term. You're your own DiDio or Quesada, and it's you get to do what you want, and it's definitely great to see people's images and no pun intended to the company. This is to talk about your own image come to fruition, and you do it with the interaction of the audience. And as you were saying, so if I'm correct, I'm not clear. Did you get this experience? And I'm not totally familiar. It's my part for not doing the research on it too much. And did this spawn out of like cross-gen and all of that stuff? This image, this idea for Ominous, or is that totally different?
Not specifically. Ominous existed as a publisher back in the '90s, in the boom time, Bart Sears had Ominous as a publisher for a year or two, and eventually, when the market collapsed, it took a lot of small publishers with it, including Ominous. So this kind of rose from those ashes. But for me personally, the experience that I got at CrossGen, which was a Florida-based publisher in the early 2000s that actually had an office space, studio space. We all worked in the same office. The experience I got putting together comics there, because we didn't have editors. There were the creative teams headed up by the writer principally were responsible for getting the books out, for getting the books done, for getting them produced, and then getting them off to the printer. So the experience that I got helping to put those books together from start to finish every month was really instrumental in me sort of having a much better understanding of the entire publishing process, not just here's my script and the art comes back and I write some cool dialogue and that's kind of all I do. I got a real education in sort of shepherding the whole process along. So that just for that, the CrossGen experience was invaluable for me, even though ultimately the publisher was not a success on a business level. I think creatively we did some really good stuff, and I wouldn't really trade the experience for anything. It was, like I said, it was ultimately not a success business-wise, but creatively, I wouldn't trade any of it.
From that experience, and also, I guess, just from experience interacting with editors and higher-ups at DC and Marvel, what are the biggest lessons you learned that you're using yourself from higher-ups in creating works at Ominous?
Well, I think the main thing that I drew out of that experience and working for Marvel and DC and really working for, I guess I've worked for virtually every U.S. publisher of any size except for Boom at this point. I think what I got out of it is that ultimately the editor's job, and that's, whether I'm editing myself or somebody else's stuff, the editor's job is to help the creative team tell their story better. The job of the editor is to help the team do its best work, not to tell the team what story to tell or to force them to tell the story that the editor wants. And obviously, in a shared universe like Marvel or DC, there are complications to that. You're all working in one big playground, so there's more editorial control over the process because there has to be. But at a base level, the editor's job is to provide the tools to the creative team to do the best job they can. So whether I'm writing something or editing something, that's always what's in my mind is how does everybody pull in the same direction to make the best product possible?
Yeah, so getting that done and learning that experience has definitely been, I could say it's been crucial for you, and I hope for good luck in the future of Ominous, because I'll list some of the projects that you've worked on, and for anybody that, of course, has not heard of Ominous, they include Beasts of the Black Hand, Demigod, Harkins Raiders, which I saw you promoting a decent amount with, of course, Kyle Rayner, co-creator Darryl Banks, Shintu, and Giant Killers. Do you have anything else any books I missed that you want to promote? I know you said a bunch of Jim Starlin's Dread Stars.
We did Dread Gods, which was a property that Bart Sears created. I wrote that, and Tom Raney did the art. We did the 4 issues of that through IDW and a trade paperback through IDW, and we are literally starting to prep the oversized hardcover that collects all of Dread Gods plus extra material and sketches and into like a 300-page book. So there's that. There's Demigod, which I did with Andy Smith. we're still doing a series of art books called the Black Book, which is a lot of unseen art from Bart Sears, Andy Smith, Jim Starlin, Graham Nolan, Darryl Banks. So it's nice to look up on my bookshelf and see a bunch of hardcover books that Ominous has published and be pretty proud of all of them.
All right, I guess to close out that part of the talk, I gotta say we're obviously going into the new decade, and we are in the new decade, depending on how you determine if you're a 0 or a 1 person, how that works. What do you think the biggest advice you could obviously give to yourself or others to succeed in indie comics going into the next decade?
I think. It's either a really, really long list of a lot of detailed stuff, or it's a very short list. I think the short list basically is tell the story that you're passionate about. Only you can tell the story that you love. So make sure that when you're telling those stories, make sure you love it. And even if it's a job for Marvel or DC or IDW or whatever, tell the story that you're excited about telling. I just had a book come out via IDW called Rising Sun, which is based on the board game that I co-wrote with my buddy Dave Rodriguez. And it's obviously a work for hire gig. I don't own it at all, and it's something that it's based on a board game. We're not creating the next Watchmen here, but I'm really happy with the way it came out and proud of the story we told, because we approached it in the fashion of this world is cool, these characters are cool. How can we tell the best story with all of those pieces? And came out I guess last week, and we got really nice reviews, and you sort of step back and go, oh, wait a minute, we just made up a bunch of stuff based on this board game, but it was still we still had a lot of fun and produced something that we're proud of.
Well, first off, congratulations on that. And basically the note is simple: create what you love and follow through and just do that and go from there. So and from there we're gonna jump in our little time machine and dive back a little. I wish I could say 25 years for the wish of being an anniversary type of thing, but now we're on year 26 years from now. Back to 1994. DC is obviously still in New York City, and New York has an interesting time. The Rangers are in the process of winning a Stanley Cup. The Knicks are about to go on their crazy run to the finals. The Yankees, before the rug was pulled up from under them by the strike, were well on their way to possibly another World Series title. And the city got its a resident Green Lantern in the form of Kyle Rayner come around. So you want to tell us a little bit about that 1994 time and how that came about?
Sure. It was, I guess fairly early in my career. I had been working on Marvel stuff. I broke in at Marvel, and the first monthly book that I worked on at Marvel was Silver Surfer. And I guess for a little while I got kind of typecast as the space guy. So when DC wanted a new writer on Green Lantern, they came to me and offered me the book, and then said, well, we're going to replace Hal Jordan with a character you make up. So obviously, no pressure right out of the gate, right?
Yeah. Oh no, just create the next legacy hero. No big deal for the Green Lantern.
Well, ultimately, we ended up having to do that so quickly, and kind of execute a story that, DC gave me a page and a half of notes for the first 3 issues, and we executed a story that was built from those notes. We had to do it so quickly because we were late on deadline. The decision had been made to go in a different direction on the book pretty late in the process. So I had to write actually all 3 of my first issues, Green Lantern 48, 49, and 50. I essentially had to write them all at the same time, juggling pages between 3 different artists. So I guess that was something of a blessing. in a lot of ways because I didn't have time to really think about the pressure or the what the reception was going to be. We just dug in and did the job. So ultimately, I knew we were going to get eyeballs on the book because of what we were going to do with Hal's story. The trick was going to be to keep people reading the book by introducing a character they cared about, and ultimately, I think that went okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No big deal about the reception. You only got a website that made you public enemy #1.
Yeah. Well, obviously, yeah. People with too much time on their hands.
Yep. And out goes Hal Jordan, by the way, of Parallax, and in comes Kyle Rayner. And you are a New York guy, so I guess my one question is, why have, instead of a New York-born guy, a California transplant to New York? What made you decide on that factor?
Because the story started off in Hal Jordan's Coast City, which was on the West Coast, just the logistics of Hal being on the West Coast and needing to hand the ring off to somebody via one of the Guardians of the Universe. We ended up with a West Coast guy, and then my real desire was to have the character feel as real as possible, and because of that, I wanted to move him to what I perceived to be a real city, New York City. It wasn't like Gotham or Metropolis or Coast City or Star City or Central City. All those wonderful, sort of made up cities that aren't actual places that DC has. So I felt like, well, I wanted to move him to New York, and frankly, one of the motivations behind that was I was very much wanting to put this character in the mold of an everyman sort of hero, very much the Spider-Man archetype, where you can, you the reader can see yourself in the hero. He's not an alien with incredible superpowers. He's not an orphaned millionaire who watched his parents get gunned down. He's just a guy like you or me. And I felt like to do that, we would be better off having a quote unquote real location for the story to take place in, rather than a city that people couldn't connect to as easily. And I mean, a side note was that I was always a huge fan of the Marv Wolfman, George Perez Teen Titans. And that took place in New York. So I figured, well, if it was good enough for Titans, it was good enough for me.
Everyone loves New York as much as people in New Jersey will not like to admit it. But yeah, obviously he was a very connecting, other than, of course, the fact that he is a big Nine Inch Nails guy. Congrats on them getting into the Hall of Fame, of course. Shout out to them.
I'm sure us putting Kyle in a Nine Inch Nails t-shirt had a lot to do with the Hall of Fame thing.
Oh, yeah. I actually made a Reddit post about it the day. I made a post on the DC sub the day they got inducted with that famous first shot of him getting the ring with the Nine Inch Nails shirt. But other than that, because I know you are a fan, what other characteristics of or stuff about your life that you molded into the character that made it big for that run?
It was really just an accumulation of details of stuff that hopefully, makes you feel like this is a real person. So, he wore, t-shirts for actual bands and I think we would drop in artistic references here and there for actual real world artists. And we just wanted it to feel as real as possible. The whole goal was to make sure that you, the reader, would be as interested in Kyle when he was out of his costume and just living his normal life as you would be when he was in costume.
I mean, and again, and you succeeded because a whole generation, I mean, a little bit older than me. I'm just a fan from going back and reading, but I would say a couple of 10 years older than me. But yeah, it's like a generational character. They associate him with Wally and Connor Hawk, the Green Arrow. And he's just a part of that loved generation, that a group of fans just, that's their Green Lantern. And,
well, sure. I think, Green Lantern's one of those franchises where you kind of get to pick your Green Lantern. because there are choices. If you're a Superman fan, you're a Clark Kent fan. That's kind of, if you're a Batman fan, you're a Bruce Wayne fan. Green Lantern's a little bit different in that you can choose your flavor. And I think a lot of times it has more to do with the first one you discovered, at just the right age. That's the one that's your Green Lantern. That's your Flash.
I mean, yeah, you went from, a lot of people can identify, at least at that age group, the guy that he's not a little bit older, created in the 60s. No, he listens to industrial music. He's an artist, or, that it's different, and it appealed to a lot of people. I know he's personally my favorite. And No Shame got me. I was reading your run, and actually that's why I started listening to Nine Inch Nails. Honestly, that's actually the funny part of it.
Oh, that's pretty cool, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and I was like, I don't know. I'm kind of like, the same thing happened. If I see a reference to a music band, and that's why I love the real music references in comics, I'll actually go out and listen and see, like, it's kind of dumb like that. I did the same with Rammstein, and now I'm a huge fan because they got brought up in a comic book once. And honestly, that's how the Nine Inch Nails love affair started this past summer when I was reading the run. Do you have any favorite arcs like that? I know you that you just enjoyed looking back now creating that, maybe was just a great story you wanted to tell.
I tend not to look back and go, oh man, that we really kicked ass on that one. I don't tend to look back a lot, period. Just because I feel like, the best job you do should be the next job you do.
Keep moving forward.
But I liked the Emerald Knight storyline where we put Hal and Kyle together, which I think was issue 100 to 106. Because it gave me a chance to write Hal Jordan as sort of the hero in the classic mold that he was created as. And I obviously didn't get much of a chance to do that with how we took over the storyline. So that was really cool. There's a bunch of different issues that I liked a bunch. And, I was fortunate enough to work with a really terrific group of artists. Darryl Banks, obviously. Paul Pelletier probably drew just as many issues as Darryl did. Jeff Johnson, Mike McCone, your story is only as good as the person who draws it. So I was very fortunate to be able to work with a lot of different artists on the book that did a tremendous job. I guess if I had to pick one overall, it would probably be the Green Lantern Silver Surfer crossover we did with Darryl Banks and Terry Austin on the art.
Oh yeah, that must have been awesome. You too. Obviously, what you're big. Everybody knows you for, and you got to write the crossover. I know a lot of people say we're well overdue for another one, and people have been harping about it. I've seen writers and artists on Twitter harping about it now. I think we are kind of overdue.
Oh, absolutely overdue. Yeah. They're the most fun stories you can tell, honestly. And I was fortunate enough to do a bunch of different crossovers, Marvel and DC crossovers, and crossovers with other places, Batman aliens and Tarzan aliens. To be able to put together some toys like that have never been together before is just an absolutely fun aspect of this job. And obviously, publishers being what they are now, and these aren't just comic book characters. These are multi-billion-dollar franchises now, so they're treated with a lot more care and a lot more corporate oversight than they were 25 years ago. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. It's just the way of the world. The comic culture is now worldwide culture, so things are looked over a lot more closely.
Of course, back to the ominous press talk, the one positive of the indie books is you're telling your story and it's yours. And so, but again, nothing wrong with, that's what I read too. I read my Marvels and DC, and that, of course, it's just a whole different world right now between writing for the two in terms of editorial. All right, so that's pretty much what I got for the comic talk. We're going to transition now to our world of sports, and I guess the big news in terms of the New York area is, of course, your football Giants, and of course, the most recent thing that happened is Eli, and which I think was the right decision as someone who saw Martin Brodeur go play a year in St. Louis, that he retired as a Giant, and people were debating if he's worthy of the Hall of Fame. So. First off, did you just, I mean, of course, it's obvious the Super Bowl runs and everything. Any personal favorite memories of Eli during his tenure?
Yeah, beating the Patriots twice. How can you not love it?
Everyone loved to see it.
Certainly the first time through when the Patriots were undefeated, the Giants were by far the underdogs, and I didn't think they could win that game. So I think that Super Bowl victory is probably, the biggest deal for me. I actually thought the Giants would win the second matchup with the Patriots because I thought they were the better team that year. I thought they were built to be able to beat the Patriots. So I wasn't as stunned, as gloriously stunned with the second Super Bowl win for Eli as I was with the first one. But I'll take them both.
It's crazy. Both years they were pretty much the underdogs who got hot at the right time. 2007 was like more shocking because it was again over the Patriots, but they got hot right at the playoffs and they just ripped off 4 straight when nobody even picked them to beat the Buccaneers, and they had to play everything on the road. And that was just amazing for them. Not for me. I'm a Cowboys fan, so I was kind of sad as a kid.
Cowboys. How are we having this conversation?
I just did another one with a podcast with the New Jersey 1015 host, who's also a Giants fan. I told him, don't hang up on me. But yes, I'm a Cowboys fan. The second time,
I'm that guy that has 2 favorite teams, which is the Giants and who's ever playing the Cowboys.
Oh, there you go. I mean, I find more Eagles fans are bitter, but yes, I always forget the Giants fans are as bitter against the Cowboys. And then the second time around, which was more in the regular season, that started with 2 victories over the Cowboys that I remember more vividly, but they got hot earlier. But again, these were 12-4, 13-3 teams. I mean, Eli led 2 teams with good defenses and got them hot and beat the Patriots twice and won in like Lambeau twice, and they won in Candlestick. And I mean, you can't ever, no matter what criticism of Eli, you can't discount that at all. It's just crazy what he did in the playoffs those 2 years with that.
If I was picking a quarterback to lead me for the entire season and have to sling the ball all over the field, I'm taking his brother or I'm taking Tom Brady. But if I need a guy to engineer a game-winning drive in the fourth quarter, I'm taking Eli because famously, none of that stuff seems to bother him. He's obviously that sort of expressionless demeanor that you often get from him. That's why he won. That's why I think he will go into the Hall of Fame. No amount of pressure or no moment seemed too big for him. He was cool and calm no matter what was going on. And I think that's a huge factor in why he succeeded in New York. And hopefully Daniel Jones is the same guy. Because I think New York proves that a lot of, not everybody can play everywhere. Certainly with, the free agent acquisitions of my beloved New York Mets, you find out there are some guys that can't play in this town because of the magnifying glass quality of it, of the fans, of the media. You need somebody with the right temperament to succeed here. And obviously very much Eli was that guy. And I will admit to getting a little misty watching the retirement ceremony. And I'm glad he made the decision to retire a Giant, not to, catch on somewhere else for, a couple more years to play out the string and, put another $40 million in the bank or whatever. He, was always was always a class guy from the day he walked in the building, and that's exactly how he went out of the building too. So certainly greatest Giants quarterback ever, and I know there's debate over whether he belongs in the Hall of Fame, but the kind of numbers he put up, the 2 Super Bowl wins, the 2 Super Bowl MVPs, I don't think there's any way you can keep him out of the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and that was my favorite part of Eli is they had the transition this year to Daniel Jones. He got benched, and yet, I mean, you never always could see a quarterback bitter at the end or whatever, but no, we see him out in Hoboken drinking games with Daniel Jones, and I was like, wow, this guy is just all like, he didn't let his ego get in the way of the future of the Giants at all, and I was just amazed by that.
I think he's always had a very good idea of who he was, what his job was, and the role he fulfilled, both on the field and for the team as a whole. He was utterly the right guy for this franchise for the last 2 decades.
Right, and so as Daniel Jones is brought up, as I brought him up, it's now time for the future. Of course, Daniel Jones and Saquon will be the stars of that new run, hopefully, if everything goes right for the Giants. And, of course, the head man for all of that is a guy who was a special teams coordinator, Joe Judge, but at his press conference sold it like just telling you would run through a brick wall for this guy. So what did you think of the hire of non-defensive coordinator, non-offensive coordinator, but a guy that just came from the Belichick system?
Well, honestly, I just assumed that the deal was basically done with Matt Rule, and that they were going to introduce him, and that was going to be the end of it. And obviously, the Panthers came in and made Matt Rule an offer that he literally couldn't refuse for huge money and a huge length of time. And frankly, I'm glad the Giants didn't tie themselves to somebody other than Bill Belichick for that kind of money and that length of contract. So it's a pretty crazy day when that all went down. And then, the Giants suddenly hired this guy, Joe Judge, who nobody ever heard of. I mean, honestly, unless you were seriously plugged into the NFL, you had no idea who Joe Judge was.
I have no idea to that.
The only reason I had heard his name at all is that he was on the list of candidates to be interviewed, and I just thought, well, he's they're doing their due diligence, and he's a guy they'll interview, but Matt Rule's going to get the job, and from all of the press reporting, it seems like he came in and did such an amazing job on the interview that the Giants didn't feel like if they lost out on Matt Rule, they were losing out. So obviously it's a big unknown, but as you said, his press conference was pretty amazing. He had me willing to run through a brick wall. I mean, there was such a no bullshit aspect to him that I think was probably certainly wasn't apparent in the last 2 coaches. Not that I think they're bad coaches, but they just didn't have that. They didn't have that, I don't know, warrior quality that Joe Judge seems to exude. So I can absolutely see why players love playing for this guy. Whether that translates into wins on the field, who knows? I guess we'll start to find out. But I feel pretty good about the choice, and I feel pretty good about the staff he started to put together. It seems like he's gone out and gotten people that he knows and that are like-minded individuals. And I guess that was one of the criticisms of the former coach Pat Shurmur, was that he didn't assemble a very strong staff, and you could see holes that were not being plugged. So hopefully this guy, hopefully Joe Judge has a better staff and a better feel for how to run this team. He's going to leave the offensive and defensive sides of the ball to his coordinators to run, and he's going to be in charge of them. So, which was a little bit different than what the Giants have had the last couple of years. They've obviously had two coaches who were offensive coordinators prior to becoming the head coach, and I guess it hasn't worked out as well as anybody wanted.
Yeah, the Giants definitely do need a fresh start, and his attitude has shown it so far that this is like he's talking like he definitely is the hire of the future. But it's all talk, and it's time to see what can happen. But he's got the Belichick letter of approval, and apparently a lot of people don't truly get that too much. And so it's interesting to see what will happen to the Giants in the upcoming future, because I think Daniel Jones is a good quarterback. Saquon is just absolute star. They just need to start building the rest of the team. Maybe just start drafting the line, getting their defense up, and it'll take a couple years. But I think they have some pieces right now, and it shouldn't be the longest rebuild ever.
Yeah, obviously there are still holes on the team. Offensive line being one of them. Defense, they need a pass rusher. So obviously the next couple of drafts are going to be pretty huge. On the plus side, they've got a lot of cap space, so they can spend some money in free agency to shore up some of those holes. Eli and his $25 million salary going away gives them a lot of wiggle room to spend some money on free agents. But it's always a question of, did we bring in the right free agents? Did we overpay for somebody and then they don't work out? So I don't think free agents, signing free agents is never a surefire way to rebuild your team. But if you can bring in the right guys, like they brought in Marcus Golden, the linebacker last year, and I think kind of on a flyer, and he had a hell of a year. So the more of those kind of guys you can find, and the more gems you discover in the draft, the rebuild gets that much quicker.
Yep. We'll see what happens to the Giants. I think I'm a little bit skeptical on Judge, but he talks the part, and Belichick says he could be the guy, who knows? And it's just going to be about building the pieces in the next couple of years and maybe signing those key parts. So we'll see what happens to the Giants. And I think, one of our last topics I'll probably finish off is it's the Mets somehow the Mets found their way to get caught up in the sign-stealing fiasco. The Mets find a way to get themselves involved in even dirty scandals that don't involve them. It's not the biggest.
As somebody pointed out, only the Mets would be able to get penalized and lose their manager for a scandal in which they benefited not at all.
Yeah, only in the Mets organization. So, as if don't know what we're talking about, Carlos, or been living under a rock, because this is everywhere. Carlos Beltran, who was hired to be the new manager of the New York Mets and was let go for his association with the scandal because he played there. Crap, who did they hire? I am scrambling who they hired.
Luis Rojas, yeah?
Luis Rojas. And so, Beltran he was a player at the time on the Astros, and he got the boot because the Mets didn't want to play the long game and seeing if anything would happen to him or getting in trouble, even though it seems all the players are having immunity. Do you think that's the right call to just disassociate, get out of the mess?
At the time I was not in favor of it. I felt like if the Mets really thought he was absolutely the right guy to lead the team forward, you go, you know what? He made a mistake. He apologized. He said, sorry. We're gonna move forward with him. I felt like, because he was a player rather than a coach or the manager or the GM, it was a little bit different situation. Obviously, the Mets felt like it was going to be too much of a distraction, and decided to part ways. We'll never know, I guess, is what I'm saying. I would prefer that Carlos Beltran was still the manager. If he was that strong and he was the right guy, I wish he was still there. But they went internal, picked somebody that they feel is up to the job. So we'll see. All of the pearl clutching and hand wringing over this, over the sign stealing scandal. I think this must have been an open secret within the league. Seems like people knew. I mean, you have to know when batters are getting your pitches. I think where the Astros obviously crossed the line was using electronics to steal signs and to relay the pitches to the batters. It struck me in some ways as the same sort of reaction that the PED scandal generated. I mean, if you had eyes in your head and a brain in your head, you knew that Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and a bunch of other people were juicing. Like, it was so obvious. And everybody just looked the other way because it was putting butts in seats and bringing back people to baseball. And then when the scandal became public, it was, everyone, there was a great hue and cry, including from the media. And, if the media, if media members didn't know this was going on, they were blind. So I think it's as with most things, it's not the scandal itself; it's the public outcry over the scandal that actually motivates change in the game. So,
which was funny from the players' perspective, because I don't think I've ever seen in any sport a time where players were calling out other players. Like, after this stuff got open, I saw a bunch of just MLB players just shaming the Astros and calling them out, and just I had the players list. I saw just a whole bunch of MLBers. I mean, Aaron Judge deleted all of his pictures with Altuve, and it's just, I don't think I've ever seen that kind of outcry from the players' side.
Well, I think you have to think that a lot of players knew, or at least there were a lot of rumors about it. The one thing that always occurred to me is, obviously, baseball used to police itself. If somebody was stealing signs, peeking at the catcher, or was getting signs relayed from the runner at second base, and it was too obvious and causing too much of a problem, the next batter got one between the shoulder blades.
They're going to get him next year. There's no way.
I think there's going to be a lot of retaliation because there wasn't any retaliation up front. So, but look, it's baseball has a mess on its hands because they selectively punished some people but not others. I know that the easiest thing is to just look forward and pretend it didn't happen and keep going. We'll see what happens. It's a game that I love. I still play softball. It's part of the American fabric, and frankly, cheating is part of the American fabric too. So this kind of stuff is going to happen. I think the real problem with it is that it was so obvious and it crossed the line. If teams are, if the runner on second base has really terrific eyesight and he's stealing signs from the catcher and relaying them to the batter, in some ways that's part of the game.
The catcher could see it too and recognize that too. Yeah. So the catcher can obviously adjust, but
then it becomes incumbent upon the pitcher and the catcher to change the signs to confuse the opposition. But when you cross the line of using technology, using high-res cameras and buzzers and buzzers under uniform and stuff like that, that's obviously way across the line.
I am on their personal opinion. I don't think there's anybody against the opinion that I think that Manfred and the company sold out by giving the players immunity from this, because they are not innocent in any way.
Well, sure. But it's ultimately what you expect because because Altuve and Springer and the rest of the people on the Astros that's who puts butts in seats in the stadium. Nobody comes to Fenway to watch Cora manage a game.
Yep.
Right. People go to the stadium to watch the players. So the managers, the GM, Carlos Beltran, they're kind of scapegoats for a wider problem, but figuring out where you draw the line and punishing the other guys who participated is a very gray area, and I think baseball is just going to stay away from it.
It definitely has a rocky road to get out of, and the Astros are going to face a lot of crap on the road this year.
I think the Astros are, there's going to whether there is actually one in the record book or not, the Astros are always going to have an asterisk next to them. That team and that collection of players, just like players like Bonds and Clemens have an asterisk next to them, and they're still not in the Hall of Fame, which is to me somewhat hypocritical. But I think eventually enough of the old guard writers will go away from the voting that Bonds and Clemens will be in the Hall of Fame, and frankly, I don't see any reason. I don't see any on the field reason they shouldn't be. They were both Hall of Fame worthy players before they ever started juicing. So again, it's a terrible gray area that is never going to be solved. It's never going to be fixed. I think everybody has to come up with their own answer.
And I guess it's been I think a little bit of 15 years since everything came out for steroids. I want to say with the book, Ken Sicko's book. But yes, the MLB's right back in it, and they're still tainted by it. I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of people still taint the MLB, see the MLB as tainted from the steroids, and now this is back in the news, and it's a complete mess, and the MLB has to figure it out. And I would think a little bit of excitement has died down for the next year, but it's just a lot of controversy, and they're going to have to navigate their way through the storm once again.
Yeah, baseball is a little bit different because it's a daily pursuit for 6 months. It's the way we mark time, or a lot of us mark time. So it's going to be an open wound for a while, but eventually the game itself is eternal, and that's what we'll concentrate on.
All right. And I guess we'll end it on a positive note and bring it back to the Mets. Just a little bit talk about the team. I see the NL East right now as a race between the Braves, the Nationals, and the Phillies. And the debate right now is how far behind are the Mets, because they weren't at all last year and they really shocked people. I think I was at Citi Field to see the Braves play them right at the end of the time when they looked like the worst team in baseball. I was right at the end of that. Alonso was starting to get hot. And then right after I went to that game and the Braves won that one, the Mets just started taking off. So the question now is going into this year, are they that far behind those three teams? What do you think, in your opinion, with Alonso and them?
No, I don't think the Mets are. I think the Braves are probably the best team in the division. Although the Braves have a lot of young pitching, and you're never quite sure how that translates year to year. The Braves also lost Donaldson. The Nationals lost Rendon, who I think is really the biggest cog in their offense. So I think the Braves and Nats have both gotten a little worse because of the players they've lost. The Phillies, I think, probably got a little better, and I think the Mets got a little better because they're bringing in some bullpen pieces. The Mets had an even adequate bullpen last year. I think they would have been in the playoffs. But so many of the games were blown in the 7th, 8th, and 9th. It was this self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm hopeful that the Mets turn things around. Specifically, Edwin Diaz. It's inexplicable how bad he was last year. So then that question becomes, well, is he a guy that can't play in New York? Is he a guy that stage is just too big for him, or did he just have a bad year? That's I think the majority of the Mets season is going to revolve around the bull. How does the bullpen bounce back? Jeurys Familia was terrible last year. Does he have anything left in the tank? Does Edwin Diaz become the pitcher that he once was in Seattle? And do the other pieces of the bullpen that they've brought in, does that give them the kind of lockdown bullpen they need? Because I think with the starting pitching that they have, the Mets should be able to stack up against anybody in the National League, maybe with the exception of the Dodgers.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really compete with if you have DeGrom, Syndergaard, Stroman on that staff. I mean, they should be set up pretty well. They added Waka. They have Porcello, Matz. I mean, the pieces are there to have a quality starting pitching staff, and you got Pete Alonso, you got Yoenis Cespedes, and it's just up to can the pieces come together and get them up there. They showed towards the end of the year that it could happen. I think it was the July and August stretch where they could compete. So it's about how they continue that this year. Personally, I think it's the Nationals to lose this year. That's my opinion, because I just think I guess it's a little bit biased, pessimistic Braves personality. I think they are going to be a little bit on the downturn, but they should be up there with them. But it's interesting to see. The only team really out is the Marlins, because they're the Marlins.
The Marlins aren't even a major league team.
Yeah.
That's I don't know what Jeter's doing down there.
To be fair, he inherited a mess.
Oh, he inherited an absolute mess. But I don't see a lot of they got rid of a bunch of really good players, and I don't see a whole lot in terms of what they got back helping the team. So it's that's really the only breather you get in the National League East is, okay, we got the Marlins coming in for 3 games. Let's try to get all 3, because the rest of the division is just going to beat the hell out of each other. There are 4 legitimately good teams in the division, which I think will end up holding down their overall win-loss records to a certain extent, because they're all beating up on each other, and that makes the wild card a little tougher to come out of the division.
Yeah, it's we are now. I think spring training is now. We're under less than a month, so before definitely a couple weeks out before pitchers and catchers report, and it should be an interesting season in the NL East and see how that comes out for them. So I got to say thank you for coming on. I'm very happy to have you on for the 4th episode, and I guess to close it out, drop some socials and then any upcoming projects that you are working on.
Well, the Harkins Raiders hardcover just came out from Ominous Press. We have those for your easy procurement on the website. As far as my stuff, Rising Sun from IDW just came out. There are other projects in the hopper that I'm not supposed to talk about yet. Let's see. Social, I am generally on Twitter is the easiest place to find me, which is just @Ron Marz. There's a Ron Marz Comics Facebook page that I don't actually maintain. Somebody else maintains it for me, but you can reach me through that too. But Twitter's generally the one that I respond to, because I can have that open while I'm sitting here working, and it's quick and it's easy.
So as I found most of my information to find research for this podcast, Ominous Press is simple. It's ominouspress.com, and they have they have a store where you can purchase all of their books that they've released, included the art books that they've released, Harkins Raiders, which you mentioned, and Jim Starlin's, oh my God, Dread. I said it wrong. I said Dread Stars earlier. It's Dread Gods. And yeah, find all the Ominous Press books at ominouspress.com. And of course, you can follow me, KDog_52. And then Sports Opinions Podcast on Twitter and Facebook. Not Twitter and Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And thank you very much for listening. And again, have a great one, guys. That was Ron Marz, editor-in-chief of Ominous Press, and I'm very thankful for his time. Again, check out all the socials. He's on Twitter, as he said. Of course, ominouspress.com, where you can check out some of his work. Beasts of the Black Hand, Demigod, Harkins Raiders, Shinto, and Ghost and Giant Killers. And just support indie comics. That's the thing. And they are, as he said, his biggest advice. They are creating what they love, and that's how you succeed. So if you see an independent comic creator, you know some, support them. It really helps. It's an amazing time to be a comics fan. Everybody, along with your DC and Marvel, your stories about your favorite characters, your favorite creators that have wrote some of those characters are out there creating their own stuff, which includes Ron Marz. And definitely check out his Ominous Press. I dropped some of the socials, but here you are again at KDog_52 on Twitter, at Sports Opinions Podcasts on Twitter, and of course this will be on Spotify, Apple Music, and all of your fun little handy dandy apps. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for some awesome future episodes. Have a great night, fellas.